Hello and welcome to On Second Street. Today we're going to talk about this issue that just keeps popping up, where we constantly hear politicians complaining about misinformation and disinformation. And at the federal level, we keep seeing attempts by the government to try to at least restrict our freedom of speech in this country, and they would argue that it's justified. Well, today we're going to talk about this issue further with some people that have some concerns about what's going on in this country. Bruce Pardy is Executive Director with Rights Probe, and Josh Dehaas is a lawyer with the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Thank you both for joining me here today to talk about this important issue. Bruce, we'll start off with you. I mean, obviously, freedom of speech is very important in a democracy. People need it to debate ideas and so forth. And as I mentioned, we keep hearing this claim out there that there's all this disinformation and misinformation. I think there certainly is, but that claim is usually followed with this idea that the government needs to step in and do something about it. What are your thoughts? If we go back to, say, 3 years ago, before the federal government has made a few changes, and we'll talk about those in a moment, but if we go back 3 years ago, was there anything in your mind that made you think that, yes, there's more, say, disinformation out there than usual and that the government needed to do something?
Well, the short answer to your question, Colin, is no. And the problem is, I think, the big problem is that we have lost sight of what free speech means. So disinformation is not a thing. Free speech does not mean you have to be accurate. Your speech is free because your thoughts are yours, not because you're telling the truth. And the real definition of disinformation is information the government doesn't like, as it is with hate speech. Hate speech is speech that the government hates. And so once you're into this place where the government is telling us what is useful, what is correct, what is true, and what is worthwhile, then you know you've already crossed a line. We have to get back to the concept of what free speech means, and none of these criteria are valid.
To be clear, when I use the term disinformation, I'm talking about things that are clearly not true. And I'll give an example. I can remember as a kid standing in a checkout line at a grocery store, and you'd see the National Enquirer there at the checkout, and it
Right,
would say something like, Bigfoot has opened up a cafe in Tennessee or something that is obviously not true. That's what I mean by
right.
disinformation, not so much
Oh
opinion, but
yes,
something that's factually incorrect.
but that is a perfect example, though. Free
Hmm.
speech does not mean you have to be correct. I mean, the Enquirer is entitled to publish rubbish. It was entitled to
Hmm.
do that back then, and today we should be entitled to publish rubbish online if we want to. The criteria for free speech is not the truth. So we have this idea that when we hear something in the media or online, that we are entitled to have it be accurate, and that
Hmm.
that is false. We should have the opposite idea, that whatever you hear and see on social media or in the media or whatever the case may be, that the assumption should be careful, be skeptical. That's probably not true.
Hmm.
And if you start with that presumption, then we start to understand what free speech is supposed to mean.
Josh, let me ask you about this issue. Do you think that maybe if we talk about things that are factually inaccurate, do you think there's been a rise over the years in the amount of information like that people are absorbing and exposed to that's maybe incorrect?
Uh, Perhaps from the government. So, insofar as there is disinformation out there, we're being bombarded with all kinds of different information from, social media that we didn't have before. Some of it's true, some of it's not true. But, the problem is who decides. So, if you start saying this concept of misinformation or disinformation exists and we need laws to tackle this, what you're doing is saying we're going to put the government or their appointees in their experts in charge of what information you're allowed to see, what you can discuss online. And we know from the COVID pandemic, it's the greatest example ever of governments get things wrong too. For a while they told us it was impossible that this virus could have originated in a lab in Wuhan, China, that it must have come from the wild, from bats or something. And we now know that the
Mhm.
leading theory among people who understand these things is that it probably did come from a lab. And you can say the same thing about COVID vaccines. We were first told repeatedly by government that they're going to prevent COVID entirely, and we know that's not entirely true.
Okay, when we come back, we'll be discussing this issue, including some of the changes that we've actually seen happen at the federal level.